Hollow footfalls echoing through empty corridors. The primal reaction of flesh brushed by an unseen touch. Shadowy figures slipping between the moss-covered boles of ancient trees. Strange calls issuing from not quite human throats, piercing the stillness of the night. Unusual lights and objects streaming across darkened skies. Stolen minutes and a void filled with obscure and disturbing memories. These occurrences and more are called by many whispered names in many countries around a world we believe we know so well. All of these things share a common thread. I'm Charles Romans, and welcome to the pathways leading to the shadows of legend. One day each of us will close our eyes for the final time. Our hearts will slowly cease to beat, and our last breath will whisper through silent lips as we leave this existence behind. Yet is this truly the end? Do we simply cease to be as the last spark races from our brains along cooling neurons to its final destination in oblivion? Or does the part of us that is uniquely our own continue beyond the grave? Is there existence beyond the temporal? And if so, what mysteries might that existence hold? There are those who would have us believe that our lives end with our final tomorrow, that the physical world is both our beginning and ultimate end. There are also those who reject this explanation, instead contending that the physical world is simply one aspect of an existence which may stretch on through eternity. For now, we are left to wonder if the strange apparitions are a product of our feverish minds, or if ghosts do haunt the fringes of the material world. The ultimate truth may lie somewhere between, unknown to us until we each pass beyond that veil. And between our searching eyes and that veil lies a path that leads us to the shadows of legend. Today we're going to speak with Cindy Sturgill, a local woman who has some paranormal experiences she would like to share. Miss Sturgill, wade right into it and let us know your stories.
Well, first off, I want to say hello and to let you know what an honor it is that you have asked me to share these stories. I'm very excited about getting into this because, these experiences are not something that I, normally talk about in day-to-day conversation. So to be able to revisit my experiences is quite a thrill. So I thank you very much for that.
Well, you're very welcome, and I'm sure people will appreciate you sharing and possibly have similar experiences.
And that wouldn't surprise me at all. Like I said, these aren't in, regular, normal conversations. So this is a wonderful venue for people to realize, hey, I'm not alone. This happens to other people too. So my very first experience that I had, my father, if anyone knows where Buena Vista Stables is out on Route 5, my father built that stables, and he built the house that is, it's on top of the hill. He built it very similar to a Frank Lloyd Wright inspired home, and people will probably recognize that if they've been in Boyd County for very long. And then there was also what we called the old house. And honey, I cannot tell you how old that house is. It's a beautiful greenish colored home, Victorian style, that is on the hill up behind the barn. So anyway, my first experience, I was probably about 4 years old, maybe 5.
Okay. And
I cannot remember why my mother was not there at the house that day, but my mother's mother, we called her Mother Clay, my grandmother. She was there, and Mother Clay was born and raised in Appalachia, and definitely had that Appalachian dialect, and she was just a wonderfully insightful woman. Well, I had been in the bathroom I actually had a candle because I was wanting to have the same powers as Samantha Stevens from Bewitched. Okay.
I see.
Actually, whenever I was a little girl, I really wanted to grow up to be Endora. I mean, she was strong. She was strong. She was independent. She had an absolutely magnificent wardrobe. That's who I really wanted to be. But I had just finished and I had blown out the candle and turned on the light in the bathroom. And I went over to the door that connected the front of the house. We had the front of the house, we had a breezeway, and then we had the back of the house that went up to the second story. And I reached for the doorknob. And as I was reaching for the doorknob turned itself and opened the door. Now, it didn't just, it wasn't a breeze of wind that came through. I mean, the doorknob literally turned. And I was so shocked when there was no one else on the other side of that door. And so I ran into where Mother Clay was in the kitchen, and I said, Mother Clay, the weirdest thing just happened. And she said, well, now what is it, Sandy? And I said, I want to go open up the bathroom door. And the doorknob turned itself and opened the door. And without skipping a beat, she turned to me and she says, now, Cindy, that was nothing but a haint. And in Appalachian, of course, a haint is a haunt or a ghost.
Yes.
And she says, that's nothing but a haint. She says, if you learn one thing in life, she says, always be nice to the haints and they'll be nice to you. And I thought, as I became an adult and upon the times that I reflected upon that, I thought, what a wonderfully receptive way and validating way of joining in with that experience with me. She didn't tell me, oh, Cindy, you don't know what you're talking about or anything like that. She validated it. And it was a very important lesson that I needed to have as I grew older, not knowing that was that important lesson. But, people are so regular people, I'll say, people who don't have an expanded enlightenment in their subconscious, they tend to be afraid of ghosts,
okay.
And I think that as young children, because we haven't had as many, well, at least back in the 60s, I think that children didn't have as many, they didn't have as much influences on their subconscious. And I think that they were much more open and receptive to experience things like this. Whether their experiences were validated by another adult or not, I think that they are much more receptive to that. And to me, that really, for my paranormal experiences, that short conversation that I had with Mother Clay has stayed with me. It made such an impression upon me that I was able to handle other experiences in a much clearer light, I'll say. If you're nice to the haints, they'll be nice to you. It makes perfect sense.
Well, given that response, it would eliminate a certain amount of fear that is typically associated with the paranormal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you have someone that you love and you respect so much, as I did my Mother Clay, well, I mean, I still do, but sadly, we lost her a number of years ago. But to have that validation and that sense of, hey, don't be afraid of it, or say, oh, you're just imagining things, that left such an indelible impression upon my life.
Now, were there other experiences at that time in the same area, the same house and everything else?
I didn't. Well, there was only one time, and I don't know if I was dreaming or if it actually happened, but I was in bed one night, and I always sleep with the night light on because I'm deathly afraid of the dark.
Okay.
But anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night one night, and I could see shadowed silhouettes on the wall. And these two silhouettes were talking to each other. And out of nowhere, my mother appeared at the bed, and I asked her, I said, Mommy, I said, who are those who are those people? And she told me, she says, well, honey, she says, those are your guardian angels, and they're planning out your day tomorrow.
Interesting.
And you know, and so again, I got validation from that, you know, and, you know, those silhouettes, they were my guardian angels. They were no one to be afraid of. But then again, I don't remember it exactly, because I was, like I said, I was like 4 or 5 years old whenever all of this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't remember if I was actually dreaming or if I actually saw it, but I'd be willing to put $1 down and say, yeah, I actually saw that.
But now your mother did acknowledge their presence. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. She acknowledged them. And apparently I don't know what I did, but apparently I needed 2 guardian angels, not 1. So people can read into that anything that they want to.
Well, I would think that it's better to have too many than not enough.
Hey, you know, it's always good to have a backup.
This is true.
Absolutely. Well, while still living on that same farm, it had always been rumored that in the old house, that it was a haunted house. And the first time that I remember going there, again, very young, 5, 6 years old, something like that, because we just didn't walk all the way across the hill to go over to the old house. No one was living in it. It was just sitting there. Mm. And we walked in, and we started to go up the stairs, and it was a warm summer day. And all of a sudden, I'm walking up the stairs, and this chill came over me. And it was like I could go up 2 or 3 stairs, and it was hot again. I could go back to where I was. It was cold. And I went back down 2 or 3 stairs, and it was hot. And it was like, oh, my gosh, what is that feeling? You know, because it was something that it wasn't just, oh, that's chilly. It's like, oh, this has chilled me on the inside. I'm actually really it's more than just an exterior experience. It was interior.
So it was localized, though, on just several steps there on the staircase.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It was just like a 2 or 3 stair area. And I could walk up the stairs and it was hot. I could walk down the stairs, it was hot. But right there for those 2 to 3 stairs, it was so different. It was so cold there. There really was no scientific or climatic or whatever way to describe what that was right there. There was no, quote, logic to it. And I remember that experience. And we had a big, huge picture window in the house where we lived. And after I had that experience, I was just so drawn to that house. You know, it really intrigued me. And there were nights where the front porch light would be on, and I'd sit there. There wouldn't be a breeze going at all. Mm-hmm. And that light would just sway back and forth with no breeze or very little breeze. And I mean, it would sway. And it was like I just knew that there was something more over there. Now, in years later, a lady by the name of Anne Rice, you probably recognize her name. I believe that she used to work at the Daily Independent. She and her family bought that house.
Yes.
And they actually, from what I heard, I wasn't living here at the time. I think I was probably in California or Utah when this happened. But my brother told me that they had like lion statues in their living room or in one of the rooms on the bottom floor, and all of a sudden the lion statues would just move. And they had all of these other experiences inside that house to where they hired someone to come in and try and remove whatever haunts or paranormal was in that house, try to remove them. I don't know if they were successful with that or not, but but this was a story that as time went on, apparently the experiences in that house became greater in visuality and a greater number of experiences. So I don't know exactly how that ended up, but again, I wasn't afraid of them. I wasn't afraid of whatever was there inside that house trying to make its presence known. And so it didn't scare me. It really intrigued me beyond what a normal 4 to 7 year old probably should have been intrigued.
Well, now, have you ever tried to go back to this property as an adult?
I have not. I drive past it all the time, but I have not gone back there. And that's a really good question. I don't know if anyone lives in the old house right now. I don't know who owns it. I don't know who owns the actual house where we lived.
Yes.
I don't know that. And, and in these days and time, just going and knocking on somebody's door and saying, "Hey, I'm Cindy Sturgill. My dad built this house or used to own this property. Can I come in and take a look around?" People are a lot less likely to do that unless whoever owns the property would know, "Oh, yeah, I know you're Ralph's daughter. Yeah. Come on in.
Exactly. People are more hesitant to invite people into their homes. I know what you're saying.
Yes. And, in such a respect that I've never gone there, but it might be worth doing some research to maybe find a telephone number for these people and call them and introduce myself to them, because I really would love to go back. But like I said, I just have not done this. I've been back in the area now for a little over a year, and it hasn't been a priority, but it might just have made its way up the list a lot. So thank you for that suggestion.
Well, you're welcome. And if you do find out that there has been activity, I would be interested in speaking with them.
Oh, you will be my first call. I mean, Mother Clay's not with us anymore, so you've even moved up the line.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm flattered.
Yeah, you were right there behind Mother Clay. So anyway, and then whenever I was 12 years old, we spent some time with a family, like on the weekends. We would spend some time with a family over in Ironton. For the life of me, I cannot remember the family's name. All I remember is that the mother was German and her name was Renee.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember the family's name. But their daughter, who was the same age as she had a Ouija board.
I see.
Oh my gosh! And this is when my mother is the one that introduced me to astrology and taught me things about, because I'm a Libra. Actually, I'm a Libra sun and a Libra moon, so I'm really, really, really Libra. But she taught me about this, and I don't know where she got all of her information, but it was at this location where, again, I learned about astrology, and then I also had access to this Ouija board. And there was one night where she and I, the daughter and I, were on the Ouija board, and it really wasn't moving around much that night. And then Mother came into the room, and she says, "Oh, you all have your Ouija board." She says, "Can I ask a question?" "Of course you can." And now, and here I'm getting into a little bit of personal life, which I don't know if this is really that appropriate for this or not, but when my mother and father divorced, it was not pretty at all. It was not, the co-parenting that we have these days and this and that and the other thing. It was not pretty.
Oh, I understand. It was a different time, completely.
Absolutely, completely different time. And so anyway, Mother asked the question. She says, "When is when is Cindy's dad going to die? And I thought, that's an odd question. Now, at the time, I had no idea that mother was terminally ill with cancer and that she was going to be gone within a year.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah. But she asked, when's Cindy's father going to die? And it went over and it hit the 7, and it went over and it hit the 5.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the most activity that Ouija board had all night long. And we started asking questions, and still it just wasn't anything much, and so we put it away. That one question stayed in my mind because I thought, wow, I wonder if that's really true.
Mm-hmm.
And don't you know, my father passed away when he was 75.
That's definitely a strange occurrence then.
Yeah, it was a strange occurrence. It really wasn't a, quote, paranormal occurrence, like a door opening for no reason, or, cold spots on the stairs and such.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very unique in that, people, there's been a lot of guff about Ouija boards and such.
Mm-hmm.
But as a 12-year-old, I was very impressed with that. Now, mind you, she and I played with this Ouija board every other weekend whenever we would go over to Ironton and spend like a Friday night or a Saturday night over there.
Mm-hmm.
And, the adults were all off playing cards, and she and I were doing Ouija boards. And we must have asked the Ouija board 100 questions, but that was the one that I remember. And and I hadn't thought of it in, 25 years.
Okay.
And then when Daddy passed away, it was like, and Daddy passed away when he was 75. 75. Oh, I just got chill bumps just thinking about that right now. But it's like it was this memory that I had not brought back up until after Daddy passed away. And then it was like, oh shoot, I should have remembered that. I should have known that this was happening, So, it's amazing how you have just, people will have triggers that they will remember something from ages and ages and ages ago that they haven't, actively thought of or pursued in such a long time.
Well, sometimes there is a trigger that releases a memory that we might possibly have even suppressed.
Exactly. And so, of course, his passing, that was not just a little trigger. That was a major life event for me.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, as it is for anyone who loses someone that they adore and feel close to and have familial ties with. But I didn't think about that until we were writing his obituary. And, I knew that Dad was 75. But we were writing his obituary, and it wasn't until I saw the numbers 75 that memory came back to me. So it's like, maybe there really was something going on with that Ouija board. Maybe it needs to have a little bit more street cred,
Well, the possibility definitely exists, and some people do put a huge amount of faith in Ouija boards.
Exactly. A lot of people do now. I've never owned one myself, but I know that for that year and a half that we spent time with that family over in Ironton,
mm-hmm.
that it was definitely, it was something that I really looked forward to, and especially since, again, I had such positive validation from my mother and my grandmother on this aspect of spirituality and such, that I was open to receive that information as well.
Right, and at that point, you had absolutely no negative input about the supernatural.
None whatsoever. None. I couldn't even hop on the internet and find negative things because, shoot fire, we didn't even know what an internet was back then. We were lucky to have a push button phone at that time, So anyway, but the one experience that I have had that, it just absolutely blew me away. So, my father owned a farm, a big, huge farm out in Fallsburg, Kentucky.
Okay.
And if some of the listeners don't know where Fallsburg is, if you know where Louisa is and you know where Boyd County is, Fallsburg is right about at the halfway point between Louisa and Boyd County, there on Route 3. And we had, I think it was a 465-acre farm, and that's where we had all of our cattle. And we also took our retired horses and let them just roam the fields out there as well. But how this property, this is going to be kind of a long story, but it's all
No problem at all.
yeah, so it's in sequential order. The original home that was on that farm was an original log home. It was made from sawed yellow locust lumber, which anybody who knows anything about yellow locust lumber knows that it's impervious to termites and bugs. It doesn't rot. It stays healthy for all of its life. And in eastern Kentucky, we used to have just forest after forest after forest of yellow locust trees. Now, they start off as white locusts, but they have to grow and get to a certain age before they become yellow locusts. If we have any yellow locusts in eastern Kentucky anymore, they are going to be very few and far between because it takes decades and decades and decades for them to get to that point. Well, this house was built. I was trying to do the math as I was preparing for our conversation today, and I'm thinking that the house was probably built about 190 years ago, and it was a beautiful home. It was a 2-story salt box home, had the big, huge veranda, the front porch on it.
Yes.
And, and the original house was a big, huge living room and a big, huge bedroom on the first floor. And there was a fireplace. It was a double fireplace there in the living room. And then upstairs, there was one big, huge bedroom over top of the living room and one big, huge bedroom over top of the bedroom. And that bedroom over top the bedroom that was on the first floor, that was what they called the boys' room. Because, girls weren't at that time, girls really didn't go out after dark. But of course, as the saying goes, boys will be boys. And they had their own entrance and stairs going up to that room. So,
okay.
So here was this house, and the original farm was owned by the Belcher family. And Mr. Belcher liked to play poker. So one night he had a bunch of men over to play poker, and Mrs. Belcher was there serving them food and, keeping them, keeping them refreshed. I don't know if they were serving alcohol or if it was water or if it was coffee, but whatever. She was there being the hostess.
Okay.
And allegedly, one of the men started kind of flirting with Mrs. Belcher, and he and Mr. Belcher got into an argument. Well, once the argument started, all the other men, they hopped on their horses and went home. But the argument continued, and next thing you know, the gentleman who was flirting with Mrs. Belcher, about 3 or 4 days later, people started looking for him because he wasn't home. He wasn't anywhere around. Nobody knew where he was. The last known place was going to play poker at the Belcher's house. Well, lo and behold, the sheriff found this man's dead body down in the cellar in the what they called the coal room. That's where all the coal and all of the wood that they used to burn and heat the house. So they found him dead. He had been stabbed. And, of course, Mr. and Mrs. Belcher said they didn't know anything about it and such. Okay. But then, they started interviewing witnesses, blah, 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 blah. Well, the sheriff at the time was a man by the name of Sheriff no, excuse me, an attorney at the time. His name was Paul Young Sr.
Okay.
And Mr. Belcher was arrested, and he was sent to trial. And of course, you know, in America, everyone is deserving of legal representation. So he took on this case, and he says, "I'll be your defending attorney. How are you going to pay?" And Mr. Belcher says, "Well, the only thing that I have to offer is a lien on my property if I'm not acquitted." And so Paul Sr. said, "Yes, okay, I'll take your farm as collateral for this." Well, they could not try him for capital murder. They could not put him on death row if he was found guilty, because no one could find a knife. No one could find any blood. You know, in forensics back then, you know, not the same as it is today. No one could find the
Right, they
blood.
were non-existent.
Yeah, exactly. And so no one could find a knife. No one could find any blood on the floor or out in front in the yard or anything like that. But they, you know, circumstantial evidence led them to arrest Mr. Belcher. And lo and behold, he lost his court case. Okay, he was found guilty. But like I said, they couldn't put him on death row because they didn't have a murder weapon.
Mm.
And so somehow or another in Lawrence County, they decided that Mr. Belcher needed to be put into a prison up in Ohio. And so all of his family up and moved to Ohio to be closer to him, and Paul Sr. got the farm. Well, Paul Jr., who ended up being sheriff of Lawrence County, he and his wife, Roberta, they inherited the farm and that house, and they decided to build onto it, to completely remodel it and build onto it. And as a matter of fact, they did such a wonderful job with this house that it was featured in Better Homes and Gardens magazine, like back in the, oh my gosh, it was like in the late 40s or early 50s, somewhere along and through there. And let me tell you something, they did a beautiful job with it. So then as Paul and Roberta were retiring and going to move to Florida, that's when my father came into the picture, and he purchased the farm. And he purchased that back in 1970, I think it was. Okay?
I see.
So let's fast forward to 1995. Okay? So we've gone from 1970 to 1995. And it just so happened that my, at the time, husband and I and our children, we were living in that house on the farm, and my father had built another house up on top of the hill. And, you know, and we had heard how, you know, the farm was acquired and blah, 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 and didn't really think too much about it until one day, and I was working over at Inco Alloys.
Okay.
And one of the department managers contacted me, you know, buzzed my office, and he says, "I really would like for you to come over." Matter of fact, this gentleman's name was Bill Elkin. And so I went over to his office. He says, "I have something for you." And I said, "What's that?" He says, "Stick a pin in that, and let's go back like 3 weeks from when Bill contacted me." Okay, I apologize for that.
That's no problem.
I went down, for whatever reason, I went downstairs and I was doing laundry. And so I went downstairs, and I had my head stuck down in the washing machine, throwing clothes over to the dryer. And all of a sudden, there was a coffee can that was sitting on the shelf that had like nuts and bolts in it, you know, those spare parts that, you know, when you build something, it's never right unless you have spare parts. Well,
exactly.
Yeah. But anyway, so there was this coffee can sitting on the shelf, and all of a sudden, the top popped off of it. And I mean, it went pop and just went, you know, probably, you know, a good foot and a half in the air, and came back down on the floor. And I looked and I went, "Oh my gosh, what in the world is that?" And I put my head back down to the washing machine, because it was top loading washing machine. And as I went to reach down in there, I literally felt something grab me around my waist and it pulled me. I was airborne, and it pulled me away from the washing machine, and I landed on the floor and got a big old bruise on my hind end. And I looked up, and I said out loud something to the effect of, I am not afraid of you. I promise you, I respect you, and I will be respectful of you. I am very nice to ghosts. And so whatever you're trying to tell me, please tell me in a nice way, and I will be nice too.
And this is going back to what you were taught by your grandmother, correct?
Yes, exactly. That's why I said, I didn't realize how important that was going to be until then. And mind you, my washer and dryer shared a wall with that same coal bin that was down in the basement. Okay.
Okay.
And yeah. And so anyway, I got up and kind of rubbed my hind end going, yeah, that's going to leave a mark, and went back to my laundry, and nothing else happened until 3 weeks later when Bill Elkin rang my office. So I went over, and he says, I have something for you. I said, you do? And he says, yes. He says, I went to the nursing home on Sunday. Mind you, this is Monday. Mm-hmm. He says, I went to the nursing home on Sunday to visit my great uncle. And he says, and all of a sudden, my great uncle, who had dementia or Alzheimer's or something, he says, all of a sudden, he starts telling this story, and come to find out, Cindy, he says, he's one of the people that helped remodel the house where you lived. And this is what he told me. And he said that as they were taking out existing door frames, the door frame that was on the very front of the house, they went and pulled it away, and out flew a knife with dried blood all over it and a bunch of old towels and such that had blood all over it too. They found the murder weapon.
That is truly bizarre.
Yes.
Now, were those ever shown to the authorities or anything like that?
Not to my knowledge. But Mr. Belcher, who had been in prison, oh my gosh, he was gone a long time before they remodeled the house and found it. I think he passed away in prison. And as a matter of fact, there's still the Belcher family cemetery that's on that farm. And some of those grave sites, they date back to a birth date of back in the late 1700s. So yeah, but Mr. Belcher had passed away. And so I don't know if it was shown to the authorities. If it was, I mean, he was already in prison for life. I don't know if they would have. I don't know if they would have taken the time to retry him. Because that would have meant he had to be extradited from Ohio, come back to Lawrence County,
Right.
And and so none of that happened. So I don't know if it was shown to the authorities and the authorities said, just don't worry about it, or if the authorities said, oh, well, we'll keep this, but never did anything with it. I don't know. But they found those. And Bill wrote down every single thing that his great uncle told him. And I turned to Bill and I said, oh my gosh. I said, the weirdest thing just happened to me 3 weeks ago. And so I recounted my being pulled away from the washing machine and thrown down on the ground and having this nice little conversation with this gentleman. And I can't help but think that for whatever reason, universal law took effect, and that the spirit of that man was, getting me prepared to hear this story. And he was getting this man's great uncle ready to tell this story. And, I have never felt like I was pushed or pulled or in any way hampered by by something that you cannot physically see. But I was so very thankful, like you said, for that lesson that my grandmother told me, because if I would have jumped up and went screaming up the stairs, or, fell apart there in the basement, I don't know how that spirit would have reacted. And I can imagine that if someone was brutally murdered, that their spirit probably did not leave their body in a very happy space. You know what I mean?
Probably not.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and that's something I'll never forget. But it warned me first by popping off the coffee lid.
I see.
And then came over and really got my attention. It was like, hey, you need to understand that I'm still here. Now, for the rest of the time that I lived in that house, which was from 95 until the year 2001, I had no more experiences like that. None whatsoever. So maybe.
But you believe that all of this was orchestrated to get this information to you?
Yes, I do. I really and truly do. I feel like there was something that needed to be said or needed to be heard. Maybe this man's spirit, maybe it didn't feel vindicated just by the fact that, knives and bloody rags, a knife and bloody rags had been found. It's like, no. I really need for my story to be told.
Right. I understand.
Yeah. And that's really and truly what I think happened. And again, me with the mindset that I had with the positive validation and, and the very logical explanation. And hey, I had 2 guardian angels. So,
Well, this is true.
Yeah, if anything was going to go down, at least, the ratio was 2 to 1.
Exactly.
But I really and truly believe that there needed to be some type of closure on that story. And I was the one that was the most open and receptive and objective to hear that and to validate that for this spirit.
Well, now, going forward from that, which was a serious encounter, have you had any other encounters or brushes with the paranormal since?
Not necessarily with the paranormal. Now, let me also say that another gentleman came in after my father passed away, and he purchased the farm. And when he purchased the farm, he had that house disassembled one log at a time.
Yes.
And one brick at a time. And it is now down, it's been reassembled, and it is at the Living Museum that is down in the Paintsville, Pottsville, Prestonsburg area. I don't know the exact name of the Living Museum, but it has been restructured for purposes of an exhibit.
Now, do you have any information on whether or not there was any sort of paranormal activity at its new location, or if activity continued at the previous location?
I don't know. It would not surprise me if there was something that happened, because when Mr. Holbrook purchased the property, he built an 8,000 square foot home way up on top of the hill. And that's where the Belcher family cemetery was. And if I'm not mistaken, because, during periods of my life, I have been very far away from this area and, not in touch with, I'm in touch with family, but before Facebook and such, I wasn't hardly in touch with anybody.
Right. That's understandable. Yes.
Yeah. And so, but it would not surprise me, because when Mr. Holbrook decided to build his house up on that property, he actually had some of the grave sites excavated and moved farther down the hill. because it was in the area where he was wanting to build the house. So it wouldn't surprise me. And even as a young girl, 12, 13 years old, every now and then there would be like a great, great, great descendant of the Belcher family that would come over to the family cemetery like once a year.
Well, that would stand to reason if they were tracing their family roots and whatnot.
Yes.
So, you wouldn't happen to know the first name of Mr. Holbrook, would you?
Yes, his name was. You asked me too quick.
Take your time.
Yeah, he was quite an anomaly himself. He used to work with the CIA. He was on the Warren Commission.
Interesting.
He had a divot shot out of his ear while he was on assignment one time. He told my, at the time, husband, because he had asked Mr. Holbrook, he said, so are you going to do any hunting up here? And Mr. Holbrook said, once you've hunted people, hunting animals just isn't fun.
That's a chilling statement now, isn't it?
I know, right? Yeah. But he is the one, think back to 9/11 and all of the congressional hearings that were held after that and Senate conferences and such. And they would listen, and the news would talk about conversations that were captured from Taliban and Al-Qaeda and various groups that were involved with 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
He is the gentleman that invented that software.
Now that is very interesting.
Yes. And I don't know the exact date. I know it was in August. Well, wait, I can probably figure out the date. I would say that it was 2008 or 2009, one of the two. Whatever day the movie Eat, Love, Pray came out, that's the day that Mr. Holbrook passed away.
I see.
Yes, but...
now, did he himself... I'm sorry, excuse me, but did he himself report any sort of paranormal activity on the property?
Not to me. Once we had conducted our business and had the sale of the farm handed over, he and I didn't have any contact after that. We left Lawrence County and moved back out to San Jose, California. And and I didn't have any further contact with him. We did our business and it was all settled and everybody was happy. And then my family, we moved back to San Jose, California.
I see. So after this occurred, did you have any more paranormal encounters that you'd like to share?
Well, there was anyone who knows me really, really, really well, and I don't know if this is really paranormal or not. I would consider it a partially paranormal experience.
Okay.
But anybody who knows me knows that I have had anxiety and stomach issues from the time I can remember. I would say probably about 3.5 years old is when that very first started. And it kept with me forever, up until I was speaking with one of my very, very dearest friends. She already knows, and she told me years ago that she has already been on this earth. She has already come to earth enough times to where when she passes away this time, she will go off and be one of the master guides. She knows this. She's very, very in touch with, she calls it woo, but, woo-woo. But she's very in touch with that. She's somewhat clairvoyant. And she lives out, she now lives in Gilroy, California, but she used to live in San Jose. She and I were very dear friends because her son and my son played music together. And that's how we met.
Yes.
And so I was talking to her one day, and this was back in 2005.
Okay.
And I was talking to her one day, and I said, "Gosh, I can't stand this anxiety anymore. I hate having this nervous, upset stomach every single day. I can't stand it anymore." And she turns to me and she says, "Within the next 2 weeks, you'll have a dream, and you will have it explained to you why you have these stomach issues." And I looked at her and I went, "You're kidding, right?" She says, "Nope, I'm very serious." And I said, "All right, bring it on." So a few days went by, and then I called her and I said, "Oh my gosh, I had the dream."
Yes.
And she says, "Okay, tell me about it." And I said, "For whatever reason," I said, "I was a male, not a female." I said, "And this is back in Egypt." I said, "I was in Egypt. I was a male. I was an engineer of some sort." I said, "I'm standing inside one of the pyramids, and I'm talking to someone, and all of a sudden, either a rock, one of the boulders sheared off, or an entire boulder fell off of the wall, and it came and it hit me." And I said, "And it ripped my stomach apart." I said, "But in my dream," I said, "I didn't die instantly." I said, "I could see where all of the infection was setting in, and, the blood and, all the gory stuff and such." And she says, "That's the reason why you have an upset stomach." And I said, "You're kidding me." And do you know that from that day, I have not had an upset stomach?
Well, that's very interesting. And what would be your take on that? How would you explain that, the change?
I think the change was I had some type of a validation or an understanding as to what was happening to me now was a manifestation of something that happened to me thousands of years ago. Because I don't believe that this is the first time on this planet. I don't believe that life is linear. I believe it's cyclical. And people may disagree with me, and that's perfectly their choice. But that's my own personal truth. And I feel like because that was so traumatic, just kind of like with the same situation of the spirit inside the house.
Yes.
I needed some type of validation. I needed some type of closure or understanding as to why this was happening with me. That was a pretty violent death that I would have gone through back in Egypt,
Well, it does. It sounded quite gruesome, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that I needed to understand that to validate my own growing understanding of the cyclical nature of life rather than a linear state, state of life. And I think that was brought to me at that time so that I could understand that, yes, you're on the right path of understanding much more about the cycles of nature and universal law and natural law and such, that, and that kind of validated my feeling. And once I realized that it was more a manifestation, it wasn't something that I was physically doing to myself or at this point in time. Did that make any sense?
Yes, it did. And that kind of would be a segue into the next question I'd like to ask. What would you say? Okay. What would you say to people who might be skeptic of the paranormal and the strange and unexplained?
Well, you know what? I feel this way. I feel that people get it when they get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not up to me to convince them of what my truth is, but people, it's like I explained to somebody one time. If you're building a house, you have definite blueprints and you have a definite plan as to, the footers have to go in first and then the walls and then, the roof and then the windows and such. It has to follow a certain linear approach. But when it comes to, but when it comes to a person's life, everyone is on a completely different path. And the reason why they're on that different path, those different paths, is because every single person has a part to play in the way in which the universe evolves, the way in which the universe lives and survives. And so, that person, here I'm really getting into some of my real beliefs here, Charlie.
So I guess it would be fair to say that you believe even the strange and the paranormal are part of what connects the whole universe together.
Oh, 100%. 100%. If it didn't have a part to play, it wouldn't be there. There would be no reason for anything sacred in the universe, whether you want to call it God or infinite intelligence or, the cosmic influence or, I am or whatever you want to call it, that would not allow something to be there if there wasn't some type of lesson to learn from it, to help us, to help humanity, to help our Earth, to help, all of the planets that rotate around the sun. There's a reason for it. And if it exists, there is a reason for it. And I truly believe it exists. I believe that our subconscious minds are all tied to the exact same infinite intelligence. And we can either be as open to that or as closed off to that as we choose to be, because we do have, first right of refusal.
Yes.
But all of that, every single person plays a part in what is present, what will be future, and what has passed. Because in universal law, there's really not time. I mean, there is kind of time, but time as we know it, that was manufactured by man.
I see.
That was not, and so I believe that the past and the present and the future actually do all kind of exist at the same time. And so we all have a part to play. There was a reason why you were born. There's a reason why your child was born. The same thing with my children. There's a reason why my mother Clay was the mother Clay that I knew and loved and respected, because she had a part to play. Had it not been for that positive influence, then I might have been just as scared as could be whenever that doorknob opened, or when I saw the light swinging on the front porch, or walked through the cold spot in the house, or, been thrown to the ground. It was trying to get these things were getting my attention. They knew that I was open and receptive. And to a person who is not open and receptive, I maybe would plant a seed, but I wouldn't have an extended conversation trying to get them to not be a skeptic.
I understand.
Because maybe it's not their time. Maybe their soul is younger than mine. Maybe they're not at that point. Maybe they've had a lot of paradigms about situations like this, and they're unable to be receptive. It scares them, or they think that they're nuts. And like I said to you earlier,
yes.
People think I'm crazy, but I promise you, I've given them a lot more reasons to think I'm crazy than these stories. So I wouldn't have an extended conversation with someone. Now, if someone came to me and asked me questions,
Yes.
I would do the absolutely best that I could to explain from my perspective, and possibly even research other books or TV shows or what have you that they could go look, read, research, things of that nature, and draw their own conclusions, because that infinite intelligence, that God, is going to speak to them and make available to them the resources that they need to formulate their own opinions.
That sounds like a solid reference there, actually.
Well, thank you.
And
thank you.
We'd like to thank you for being on the podcast this evening, and you have a wonderful evening.
Well, thank you so much. Again, I was honored that you asked me to share just my little tidbits here, and I wish you all of the success in the entire universe with this podcast. I think that you have made available a venue for people to have validated their own thoughts and beliefs and experiences, and also a venue to where people who may be, we'll say, paranormal curious,
yes,
a venue to where they can kind of dabble their toes into the water, and they can start learning for themselves and find their own truth.
And that's the goal of the podcast right there, is to let people share their stories.
Exactly. See, I didn't even have to read your mission statement to know that. So anyway, again, thank you so much. It has indeed been such a pleasure speaking with you, and I do hope that the listeners that they gain something positive from the experiences that I've shared today.
Well, thank you very much, and you have a good evening.
Thank you. You do the same, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
This is Charles Romans, and on behalf of myself and our guests, thank you for joining us on this walk through the shadows of legend. If you like what you heard, please follow us and visit our website at shadowsoflegend.com and support our Patreon page to help keep the content flowing. And if you would like to be a guest and share your own brush with a stranger paranormal, don't hesitate to email us and include a contact number. The strange and surreal, the normal and the paranormal are all aspects of the world in which we live. As you reflect upon the stories we have shared, keep in mind that the people sharing these stories are actual, real people just like us. Were the stories shared compelling enough to be given credibility, or should they be relegated to the deeper part of the shadows? But when determining this, it might be a good idea to keep an open mind, because when we look around, we might discover that our own world is less brightly lit than we once thought. Until next time, I'll be waiting for you in the shadows of legend.